Okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another weekly ConnectSMART webinar. My name is Bill Kilday, and I work with the development team over here at ConnectSMART. Today, I'm going to be talking about ConnectIO, what it is, how it works, and what you can do to get started using it. So let's get started. Okay, so first up, here are the topics we're going to cover today. One, what is ConnectIO? What is it used for? How do we do it? Two, why are we using it? What is the purpose of this product? How is it actually going to be benefiting you? And then three, what are the different parts of ConnectIO? So we're going to cover some of the terminology used in it so you can become more familiar with that. And then lastly, we're going to look at how you can get started using it. And that's actually going to lead into a little demo of the new onboarding wizard that we just pushed out. All right, so let's get started here. So first up, what is ConnectIO? So ConnectIO is basically, if you were going to use a buzzword to describe it completely, a data warehouse. So what that means is it retrieves data in from different systems like ConnectWise and LabTech. It stores that data in databases inside of the data warehouse, and then it allows us to generate reports and dashboards off of that data. ConnectIO itself is hosted by ConnectSMART. We host that over here on our servers. There is actually an on-prem version available as well, but most people are typically going to be doing the service version. And the reason for that is you don't have to go and store your own data. We can actually handle all the data load for you. Okay, so next up, why are we using a data warehouse? And just a data warehouse in general, what is the purpose of using a data warehouse? So the first thing is performance. So in a traditional setup, if you wanted to go and do reports and dashboards from your ConnectWise server, you would have to actually go and ping that particular production server to get those metrics. And of course, that's the exact same server that your users are using. So if you have a report that's doing a lot of intense querying or very tricky calculations, that's going to slow down the entire system, and then your users are actually going to feel that performance hit. If you do something with a data warehouse where you actually offload the data that you're going to do reporting on to another system, any of those reports and dashboards are not going to impact your users that are using the system. In addition, once you move the data over to another database, you can actually optimize it for querying. So we can add in indexes or normalize views so that when we go and run those queries and those reports for dashboards and things like that, they can run faster than they would on the production system. And another reason for using a data warehouse is we're now pulling in all of that data into a single location. So if you have multiple systems that you want to get metrics from, for instance, ConnectWise and LabTech, that's a popular combination. Traditionally, you'd have to go and actually connect out to each one of those databases separately or to their particular APIs and then pull that data down and then put it into a report. Once you're using a data warehouse where we've actually already pulled in all of the data that's relevant to each of those systems, you just have one source of data that you have to go to actually go and generate your report. In addition, you can actually do some cross-referencing between that data. So if you have companies in ConnectWise that match up to groups over in LabTech, you can do queries where those are joined together. Okay, so that's why we're using a data warehouse. Next, we're going to talk about what are the different parts of ConnectIO. So we have 4 different terms I'm going to go over, and I'll do each one of these in turn. So first is tenants, then content stores, then data source packs, and then tasks. All right, so first up are tenants. So a tenant is basically your slice as a customer of ConnectIO. So when you sign up for ConnectIO, our support staff is going to create a tenant for you inside of the system, and that's typically going to be a short form name of your company. And this right here is actually a screenshot of the login screen for the ConnectIO console. And you can see right here is the spot where you would type in your tenant name. So a tenant is scoping all of your users and reports and data to your particular instance of ConnectIO. And so you're the only people who have access to that particular data. So that's what a tenant is. It's basically your domain inside of ConnectIO. Next up are content stores. Now, content stores are basically just databases. If you look at the back end of how all this is working, one content store is one database inside of the data warehouse. The reason we don't just straight up call them databases, though, is because there's a little bit more intelligence that's baked in around the database in terms of if you connect it to, say, a ConnectWise data source or a LabTech data source, we know that that database is now connected to those data sources. So if ConnectWise comes out with a patch that breaks a bunch of their views or changes how their API access works, and we go do that code update to go and fix all that, we know that that particular content store is connected to ConnectWise, and so we need to go and update that content store to apply all these new fixes and things for the ConnectWise system. So just to clarify again, content store, basically just a database. This is where the data gets stored, and this is where reports and dashboards are going to be reading that data from. So next up are data source packs. So a data source is one of those target systems we're trying to get data from. So for instance, ConnectWise or LabTech or any of the other systems we can connect to. Each data source, of course, has different requirements for how we're going to store its models and how we're going to go and access the data from the system. So ConnectWise uses a particular kind of SOAP API, and LabTech uses another kind of API. And then the actual data that we're pulling out of those systems, of course, is different. So ConnectWise has things like companies and tickets and activities, whereas LabTech is things like computers and groups and software. So the pack that we refer to here is actually just a collection of these models and scripts and tasks that know how to store, how to, one, retrieve and then store the data from the different data sources. And then finally, the last thing here are tasks. So with the data source packs, we know how to import stuff and we know how to store it inside of our content store. So the only other question is, how often should we do that? And we don't want to do it continuously, right? Because we don't want to run down the performance of your ConnectWise server or LabTech server. So we're not going to pull it all the time to just try to grab data as frequently as possible. So instead, we make decisions on which data needs to be updated at which intervals. And that depends on the pack, it depends on the data source, and it depends on the particular type of data that we're getting out of it. But typically, we'll usually do a base import at the very beginning when we first set it up. That's just going to import everything once, and that can take a long time to run, but that's going to get you all of your base data in there to start with. And then after that, we'll do either quick refreshes on particular data where we're just looking for changes, like for instance, in ConnectWise, we do tickets. We'll refresh those very often. And then other data, we're going to refresh on a slower interval, so nightly or hourly, or depending on what the pack, it depends on the actual timetable we're using for that. Okay, so we've covered what ConnectIO is, why it's used, and then the different parts of it. So now we're actually going to look at how you can get started using it. So first up, if you're a new customer, when you go and do your ConnectSMART subscription, that's going to be a line item in there of data warehouse, so just make sure that's in there. And if you're an existing customer and you want to know if you're eligible to get moved over to the system, just contact support and they'll be able to walk you through it. After you do that process, the support team over here is going to create that initial tenant for you and then create a login for you that you can then use to go log into the io.connectsmart.com website, which is the portal for ConnectIO. And then after you log in, we now have a nice big green button to start a Getting Started wizard. So you just press that button and follow through on the prompts, and it'll get you kicked off on getting your data imported into the data warehouse and all of your tasks scheduled up. So that's actually what we're going to do right now. So let's go try that out. Okay, so I'm over here at io.connectsmart.com. This is the console for ConnectIO. And I have a little tenant here that got created for me called BillBiz, and they created a user called Bill for me. And so I'm going to type in my super secure password and log in. And you can see at first I have nothing set up in here, so it's going to present me with just a hey, welcome, and click this big green button. So we're going to do that. So this is the onboarding wizard. So when you first log into the ConnectIO system, this is what you're going to run through. So it gives you a little bit of information about the steps we're going to go through, and you can click this little help icon to get a little more details on each of those steps. But I'll walk you through right now everything that's going to happen. So if we hit next, the first thing that happens is it's going to create a content store. So we talked about content stores early. It's going to create my first content store for me automatically. And by convention, we just named them as ConnectSMART. I think we just like to have our name on things, but this is going to be your starting point as a content store. So after that, you come over here, and now you're going to select the packs you want to actually deploy to that. So these are those data source packs. So in this case, I want to deploy ConnectWise here, and there's learn more links here if you need to get more details about how those work. So we're going to do ConnectWise, and then right now it's actually deploying out that pack to that content store. So you can kind of see what's happening here. It's basically all of those models and views and scripts that were inside of that pack are now being pushed to that content store. And now that that's all done, we can actually go and start setting up our pack. So here we get to the first configuration screen, particularly for the ConnectWise pack we just deployed. There's a little bit of information up here. You can go and see some extra help if you go there. These are the settings for that pack that we need to fill in so that it knows where to actually go to get our data from ConnectWise. So if you click on the little help link there, it'll drop in some extra help text there, or you can just hover over these. In this case, I'll type in a little bit of our stuff here. So, and I'm not actually going to use any real login stuff, but we'll just drop in some example data there, and then you click Next, and then it's going to let us go and schedule up the tasks that are actually going to start importing the data. And we can see here, some of these are already checked for us. These are the defaults that are pretty much required to do this. So if you're not sure what's going on with these tasks, just leave the defaults selected and hit Next, and it'll schedule up all the ones that need to be scheduled up. And then finally, we can see at the end here, gives us a little summary. So we created that new content store, right, which is basically creating a database on the back end. And then we deployed out that ConnectWise data source pack, which of course created all those new models and tables and views and things on that content store. And then we configured our ConnectWise instance with some credentials and then scheduled up some tasks so we can begin doing data import. So if we hit finish, we can see now the welcome screen here has changed up a little bit. We get some quick links. We can see over here that we now have tasks in the queue to start importing data. If you navigate over to the scheduled tasks page over here, you can see all those tasks are ready to be run. And it's also good to know if for whatever reason you need to go and change your credentials that you originally set up for this. Like for instance, I set up a bunch of dummy credentials in here. If I click on each of these tasks, I can actually go in and change up what those credentials are going to be used for those particular tasks. That's one way to troubleshoot if your integrator login had the password changed. You can come in here and actually just change the password there. And then if we look over at the content stores page, we can see here's that content store that we just created called ConnectSMART. We can see that the ConnectWise pack is deployed to it. And this is actually the name of the database right here. So when we create that content store, like I was saying, it's basically just creating a database on the back end, which means if we click this access button, we can see if you wanted to connect directly to that database, we've already pre-created a read-only SQL user for you, which is the name of it is right here. And you can change the password of that to whatever you want. You can also enable or disable this read-only user, but just keep in mind if you do that, the dashboards and the reports are trying to use that user when they're pulling data for reporting purposes. So if you disable it, your dashboards and your reports probably aren't going to work anymore. And then finally, if you want to, so I've deployed ConnectWise here. Say I deployed ConnectWise and I was like, okay, this is going good. I want to actually go and do lab tech now as well. You can just click on the packs button there and then run through the wizard again using the lab tech selection. So that's going to deploy that out, and then I can go and actually go and set up all of my lab tech information. I'm not going to do the full thing right now, but that's pretty much how that would work. And additionally, the last thing I'll mention, so most people are just going to need the one content store. If you do, for some reason, need more than one content store, you can just do the create store button up here, and it runs through the wizard again, starting with naming your new content store. So. And that is the end of the presentation on ConnectIO and the onboarding wizard. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them into the webinar or contact us outside of the webinar. And if not, then have a good day. All right, thank you.